welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to talk about how to draw a golden snub-nosed monkey. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the golden snub-nosed monkey. Their faces are blue and their hair is orange. So we'll see how that goes, and we're just going to kind of hop right into it. They look pretty cute. So even with skin, just like with fur, right, I'm doing those overlapping strokes I always do. Fur, it's much more important. The skin, I just have to make sure I'm following the contour. Right, so we have, especially as the eyes come down this way, there's no hair to allow for a change in direction, so I just have to be careful on how I mimic that. They look, their colors look almost fake. When you look them up, it's such a cool looking monkey. So what I'm doing here is I'm just following the curve around the eye. I'm going to kind of do the same thing with this. I'm going to have it just looping down from here, immediately looping. Since you can't see the top of the nose, it's almost like they don't, they have a nose, obviously they have this, but there's a distinct separation there between the face and the nose. So I'm just going to almost create a circle. And around the eyes, always having to be a bit more careful because it's such a precise edge. I know I've mentioned this a lot, but I do try to avoid line conflicts. And so when you come together in a situation like this, where I'm not having it just loop on this side, but actually sort of come away from the eye, I have to be careful on how I bring them back together. Otherwise it'll be noticeable. And this will all be covered, the edge of this will be covered by the orange fur, so it's not as important that it lines up with a nice neat edge. And with fur you don't have to as much anyway, except by the eyes where it's a little bit more important to get sort of a nice straight line there. And just like the other side, we're looping it, right? I'm looping around here instead of stopping, and then as we come here, we'll have it coming straight off. And with the nose, we have a different line of the contour, so we don't have to worry about following the same line we already built with the face. It'll help indicate that this is a different, on a different level as well. It's not running together. Some of this edge will be covered by hair. Right, it's got that orange hair that comes up over his face. But it's not always a bad idea to put the skin underneath. It adds that extra layer. Might not work. I might have to erase back a bit if I put the blue all the way under. But it might work to add sort of another layer of depth, especially down in here where some of this hair isn't as thick. So you'll want the hair that's not as thick definitely over the area of blue that's noticeably blue on his face, his skin. I'm going to bring this straight down, these lines down into his mouth. Like the eyes with the mouth, I need to be a bit careful. And on the side, right, I'm looping in on this side I'll be looping in this way, and once I get to the middle to help that transition, I'm going to be coming straight down. But it is easier to draw on an edge when you're looping in instead of coming straight down. That also helps follow the contour, right? Like as his lip comes in, in theory it's coming in towards the, into his mouth, and then likewise the bottom will be bulging back out. But here the lines would connect. So as I bring it down, it's easy to, just sort of as mistakes I've made before, it's easy to want to bring this into a nice circle. It's going to have that consistency, but if I want to bring this down and avoid any strange lines, I'm going to stop here and work on the middle, and then I'll be able to bring it kind of all down together before I accidentally forget and create a circle with it instead and connect it here. That would create some line conflicts. I can avoid that just by working on this instead, bringing the lip down and bringing it all kind of down together. I can see exactly where everything is and how it's going to connect together. And just like above we were looping it in, below on this lip we're looping it out. So now on to the orange of his fur. Just like, as always, looping the hair in between. With monkeys, their hair is a bit longer here, at least with these guys. So, should go decently quick. And then it's going to come all the way up into here. They do have some white by the ears, so we won't fill that in with orange, which will be nice. It'll give a nice clean line to the head. Because they are hairy, we probably also have some opportunity at the end as well to add some extra fluff, which is always, I think, an interesting thing to do, kind of a fun thing to do. And you can see with long-haired animals, right, like I can make these strokes longer because we mimic the length of the hair, which means it goes a lot faster. If you were a short-haired animal, this would be taking a lot longer because I'd be keeping my strokes short. But their hair is long and messy. I'm probably going to have to keep the sketch up because I did sort of sort out where his head would be versus where his hair's coming out to, but I just wanted to see what they look like without it. That's looking good. Alright, now I'm going to get the ears. And then we'll transition to the highlights and shadows. And I should say it's the hair on their ears that are white. We're not actually seeing their ears, we're just seeing the fluff. I'm actually going to darken the white of the ears just a little bit. On some of them they do seem to be white, but in some cases they seem to be just a little bit of an off-white, so we're going to use this color here. And I'm just going to come down here and mark that so I can reference it later. On the sketch, I typically, sometimes I can get a read, like I need to match the color again to go darker. I'm sorry, to add the highlights and the shadows. Sometimes I can get a read on these because my strokes are big enough, and sometimes they're not, so I always just make sure I have a color swatch in the event it is not good enough. There's the sketch so far, so I'm going to have the light source coming in from my favorite spot, which is, we usually see is always over to the right. And I know I always mention this, but when I say a light source is coming from the right, I don't mean straight to the right. I mean it's coming from above and in front of the subject. And I do that because it allows the most light to hit the subject. If I had it coming from behind, most of the face would be in shadow. You'd have like a rim of light on the side of the light source behind it, and if it's coming from right next to it, you would have this extreme shadow off to the left or the right, and the side itself would be in highlight. But by having it above and in front of, you have the most opportunity to really add a burst of light to your subject, which is what you want. You want your subject to be seeable. Alright, so now because of the way his hair is coming up, there's likely going to be a bit of shadowing right where the hair and the skin are meeting, because the hair is going to be casting a bit of a shadow. There is a little bump by the nose, and the eyes are very much like a human's. And then under the eye would have a shadow. My neighbor's dog, sounding rough, but I can see him out the window and he's fine. I think he's just trying to get attention. Now, what I'm trying to do here, they have some folds in the skin, and so by leaving it in shadow, I create that illusion. And so they don't have as many as like orangutans and things like that, so, or the elephant we did last time, where he had a ton of wrinkles, but he has a few, and so I'm trying to leave the gaps to show the wrinkling, especially by the eyes. Now, eye coming up this way, on this side, on the top is going to be going into shadow. So how our eye sockets work. Our eye sockets are in a ball-shaped recess in our heads. So that inevitably is going to cause a shadow here before it kicks back into highlight. And you'd have highlight underneath, because where this side's rounding sort of down and in, this side's coming back up, and so that would be catching the light. And again, as I already mentioned, right, as I come up into where the hair's connecting in, I'm going to add a little bit of shadowing on these edges where that hair would be blocking it out. Alright, so there's the first one. So as we transition to this side, it's going to go a little bit more into shadow, but we still have some highlight to do. Over his eye is going to catch some, underneath is going to catch some, his cheek is likely going to catch some highlight as well. So there's still a lot of highlight to add on this other side, but we'll start seeing it, transition more into shadow. So as the nose, right, the nose is kind of rounding over. So as the nose rounds over, you're going to go from that highlight into shadow over here. As that little hump, there's a little hump right here. So we're going to have a bit of shadow before highlight kicks back in. Probably going to do something I often do where I just sort of, lightly fill in one side and then I add highlights because it gives me more control, right, to lightly fill it in. So I think I'm just going to lightly fill it in. I'm not putting full pin pressure, just sort of lightly filling this side in at the moment. And then that'll give me the flexibility to sort of really go back in and add shadows or highlights exactly where I want them in a way that makes total sense in the composition, hopefully. If I do it right, it'll make sense in the composition. I mean, you can do it with putting full pin pressure and doing highlights right out of the gate, which is what I did on this side. But it's easier to feather out shadows. Like I can't just have an abrupt transition, and so if I get it just a little wrong, it's easier to have a slight shadow already in place so that I can really see exactly where I need to cut it without having an abrupt change. Add a little bit of light over the eyelid here. It's where the bulge in the eye would be catching the light. And it's going to go into shadow as it rounds to this back side. And then you're going to have a little bit of highlight here against the bottom of the eyelid where that's actually picking up the light for the exact sort of opposite reason, right? Like this is bulging up and going into the eye. This is bulging out from the eye before it rounds back into shadow. So right underneath you're going to have a little bit of a burst. I'm actually going to do another one for another wrinkle because that likely would also still be kind of picking up a little bit. Just going to have that there. And this going into shadow. And probably a little bit on his forehead, right in here, where this is actually likely pushing forward. Just that little bit. It did the opposite on this, right? It went into shadow there. But in this case, we likely would have just a little bit before it gets into shadow. And then under the eye on his cheek, same thing. Their faces are shaped a lot like humans in a lot of ways. And so in that respect, the same anatomy tricks that work On humans, we'll work on monkeys, for instance, the cheek, right? And the cheek is where the bulge is coming back out from the eye, so that would inevitably pick up a highlight, even though it's on the opposite side. And just thinking about how, you know, the whole figure is kind of rounding. And just also making sure it's feathered out nicely, right? I don't want a hard, jagged transition. I actually think that's not quite good enough here. Make it a little gentler. Maybe even a little gentler over the nose. Yeah. That's better. Alright, so now his nose. So, when you're coming to any edge, you know, you add a shadow. Even on the side closest to the light source. It's harder to do on a narrower spot, so sometimes I don't, but it will help in a case like this, where we have the highlight of the face and the nose. These lines are coming in the same direction. If I have a shadow here before I have a little bit of a highlight and go back into shadow, because this is obviously rounding into the nose here, it might visually be enough for us to see that difference. You can kind of see that line between, if I'm very careful about how I do it and mindful in the edge, you can kind of see the line between the nose, even with the little shadow I just put in, and the rest of the face. It should be enough to kind of indicate that difference. Just have to make sure I don't make it look weird. Alright. So now I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight here against the shadow I just put in. Be more forgiving as we come down this way. And then we're going to add a little bit of shadowing as it comes in. And as we come to this edge, of course, we're going to have a shadow again on the face, on his mouth. Because it's on that edge, all edges have a shadow. And then it'll come back into highlight. And let's finish up the nose. So this back side's going to have a much bigger shadow, right, as it kind of comes in. But it's also going to have some highlighting. It's going to have a shadow as it comes in that way, and I'm going to say it's going to have a highlight right through here, where it would be catching some light. And then you're going to have some highlighting underneath where that's likely going to be catching, but I'm going to put that in shadow so that I can decide where. See, it's coming right through here. Alright. And there's a little dip in between them. Just like the other side, you know, this is also going to have some highlight against it. But that means the edge is going to be in shadow. The edge on this side as well. So this is going to be in highlight, right? Where, because it's bulging up, it's still on that same side. And then as we come this way, might be more shadow than the other side because it's away from the light source. But he's still turned in a way that he likely is catching some light on the inside of his nostril there. Maybe right through here. And then again down here. There's going to be some transitioning happening as this comes over, right? His face really is kind of like a ball. His mouth, I should say. It's a circle. So outside of the nose and the mouth, we would add shadows and highlights like a circle. And there's going to be a ring of highlights here because his top lip is rounding into a recess, right? So you have a highlight that's here, but as it's sort of rounding away from the light source over here. Likewise, underneath, we're going to have a bit of highlight through here because you have the opposite happening. Once again, you have this rounding out and therefore catching the light before it goes back into shadow down here. But you're kind of, you know, I've said it before too, where you're shadowing shapes within shapes. So you have a circle, but you also have this split happening where you're shadowing kind of this above oval and this bottom one, but you're shadowing it all within the context of the bigger circle. So keeping all of that in mind and just sort of thinking about how the shadow or the light would, you know, be casting a shadow, how that would affect your subject. Breaking it down into smaller forms can be easier, so you're not dealing with one giant subject, you're dealing with a smaller bit of the puzzle. And then, you know, just over time, it gets easier and easier to do. And then, of course, as we come underneath, there's going to be more and more shadow. So on this side, as we bring it down, we have a nice big shadow kicking in from his chin. And I know you see me do it a lot, but I am kind of a compulsive saver. I have learned what happens when you don't do that. Especially in the summer, sometimes my Photoshop will just crash. And I don't know why it's weather dependent. I know I keep my house pretty warm, but not that warm. And it's not that it's overheating, it just Photoshop crashes. And so I lose anything I haven't saved. And that makes me very sad. So I do kind of compulsively save, especially after I finish like a section. I do it a little more, I do it a little less when I'm recording, but I feel like I need to remember to do it more. Now, where I am now is actually going to be in highlight. I'm doing, you know, I'm once again doing the light pen pressure so I can decide that, because I'm going to have to bring this down here into shadow. So it's just going to be easier if I have light pen pressure to deal with. But I could probably just finish out the mouth and then do the rest in highlight so I'm not double working myself. So then this is going to be in highlight. Now as I get to this edge, I don't want it to be this sharp contrast between highlight and shadow. So even here I'm going to be tapering just a bit before I can put real full pen pressure into full highlight. And then as I get down, you know, being mindful, allowing it to taper up so that again I don't have a harsh, I don't want that harsh line, I want it to be a nice gentle transition. And now we've got to bring this over as well. So all of this would be in highlight to a point. It's a little easier to taper it when I already have a shadow in place. That's why I did the shadow first. I'm going to start backing off here. So I'm lessening my pen pressure, but it's still not into full, like I'm not fully pulling back yet. Because we want to taper that off nice and gently, especially on a rounded surface. It's going to taper off more gently than if this were a harsh line, like a square or something else. So now we have his top lip. And we just got to get his bottom one in. There would be a nice big shadow down here because this would be that underside of, you know, basically the ball. And being a bit more careful, although he's going to have some hair hiding that. Going to be a lot of hair hiding the edge of his face, so I'm being more careful than I probably really need to be. Now, I don't want the top edge of his lip right here to be in highlight. I want it to kick in right after because his lip is coming out of a recess. So some of that's going to be visually in shadow for us. And so I got to bring the highlight down just a little bit. But for now I'm filling it in very lightly. Okay, so now to add the highlights. So right in here, I think we're going to have that kicking in. Leaves the top in just that little bit of shadow, but allows sort of a bulge in the lip, as it would on this side. Come all the way over. And start fading here. Maybe a little bit more. I don't know that they'd have a distinctive lip, so maybe I can get rid of that extra little bulge. And now we can move to his fur. I'm actually going to go ahead. Where is it? I'm going to fill in some of the other hair while I'm here. It's almost like whiskers where you're adding just a little bit. Now just where it's coming down into here, it likely is going into shadow just a little bit because of, you know, the hair's bulging out from the face, and so where it's sort of connecting back into the face is going to have some shadowing. Not a lot, but certainly some. You know, like right in here, it's probably kicking into a nice thick highlight. Now under here, you know, just like we do for the eyes or even the mouth here, right? Like this is angled up, it's underneath, so it's going to be catching the light, whereas it's above here where the light source is coming on this side where it's going to be going into shadow, right? So being mindful of that change, like this would, you know, instead of going into shadow, it would definitely catch highlight. But around here, it's probably going to really, the highlight's probably only going to last till about here and then taper back into shadow. On this side, again, this is a heading down, so maybe not, but you might pick up some highlights on this side, maybe some on this back side here too, but here is likely going to be in shadow, and of course up top will be in shadow. Really kind of depends on the effect you're going for too. If you think it would look better a different way, you know, sometimes it's all in what look you want. And then of course underneath here, you're going to have it going into shadow because it's on an edge. And see, that line is a little too harsh, so it's the same as here. So I'll need to taper both of those back out, or out more than they are. Now his head, you know, it's relatively circular. So just like you would, you know, draw a ball, you would have the highlight going into shadow, with of course a kind of a face in the middle. But the face we've already done, so we'll have to be mindful of those interactions, right? Because the his mouth and chin will bulge forward, so this will create some shadows. You have, you know, where his face would be naturally rounding away here, and there's already some shadow on his face, but probably some highlight as the hair is kind of kicking out. So as we get there, as we kind of come around here, all of this that I'm doing now will be in highlight, except the edge, which I've already sketched in the edge. And I just need to make sure that I am feathering it in a way that it doesn't look like some harsh line, but otherwise that should be relatively straightforward. Foreheads will catch more of a light for a while because you have a bigger space kind of aimed towards the light source. And then we'll just, you know, work our way over. As we get to that back side, we'll start really worrying about how the shadows go, but it won't take long. This should go pretty quick. Especially because, as I've mentioned before, right, he's got nice long hair, so I don't have to make shorter strokes. I can make these nice long strokes, and it'll cover the distance pretty quick. We're starting to shift over to shadow right through here. The head's rounding away, but some of this would still be in highlight, so you can see I'm pushing the highlight and sort of building that in as I make this shadow deeper as I bring it down. This should give enough room to be able to taper it into each other so that there's a nice gentle transition from shadow to highlight. I'm going to feather this in here. Foreheads have, again, a pretty decent swath of highlight, so by giving myself an extra shadow to work with, I can be gentler with how much room I have to feather that in. And it's kind of a medium amount of pin pressure, plus it's the combination of, you know, adding in more strokes that is giving me sort of a burst of light as I feather it in, right? Like I'm not putting full pin pressure through here, but extra strokes and sort of medium level pin pressure that allows me to feather it. Not necessarily holding back, but I'm not pressing down. That's probably the best way to describe it. We're going to have just that little bit, as this side's going to be probably catching some light, but I don't want to make it too much. Comes down into his face. And then have that go into shadow as it comes over here, because you're going to have the shadow kicking in by the nose. I'm giving him a few errant strands of bright. I didn't put full pin pressure when I did that. I just kind of layered up my strokes. Gives me some room to do a few like errant strands, which will make it look more realistic, where you have, you know, just a small section that's brighter or not as bright than others. Yeah, he is looking pretty cute. I'm going to thicken out some of this, but I'm going to do it kind of loosely and more wildly, since they have kind of that wild hair around here. I want it to be bright enough that it's obvious, but not so bright that it takes away. Through here it wouldn't be as obvious, so being a little bit more subtle. But we'll kind of do the same as we come around, right? It's just light pin pressure, and you have these sort of light wispy strands going in different directions. I'm going to do the same underneath for his chin. See, I'm just kind of doing these quick, some to the right, some to the left, a handful of each in each direction every time I do it. Thickening up just a little bit on his chin there. But not through pin pressure, this is just through pin strokes, keeping my pin pressure very light. So this is now determined by how much I have of it in one spot, rather than by how heavy I've put it. So that means I need to lessen out my strokes as I come kind of over to this side, right? Because I want this to be distinctly more noticeable. All right, so now we'll get his ears, and then we'll go back through and do kind of loose, wild strokes for his hair, and then his eyes. Their eyes, you know, usually animals, I mean, some animals you can't really see their eyes very well, and I can't see their eyes very well when I look at pictures. They look black, so what I'm likely going to do is just take a little, do a light flare on their eyes instead of actually drawing it out, but it's mostly because I can't actually see from pictures what color their eyes are, because even on close-ups they show up as black. So I could probably Google it, but if even on a close-up like that it shows up as black, it's a good bet that I could do it as black, and it'll look right. So the ear, right, just like anything else, the edge is always in shadow, and then we're going to kick into that highlight. May also change the layer order. You know, with Photoshop that can be important. And I may drag this underneath the red because it would be, so I don't want the strokes looking like they're on top in the event I breach into the red, which I probably will. So I'm just going to drag it, right? I'm going to left click it, hold it, and then drag it underneath the other layer. And now it is under. And this side is going to mostly be in shadow. I'll give it a little burst of highlight in the middle, but for the most part it's going to be in shadow. Alright, now I already did it on this side, but I'm going to give some wispiness. Oh, let me give it just that little bit of light here. Alright, now we're going to give it the same wispiness we did on the other side, and then give the other side a little bit more as well. So just like before, right, it's just going to be these quick light lines, left and right, light pin pressure. I'm going to add to some of the scraggly look. There, now we're going to take that orange and do the same thing all the way around his head. Long lines. Indicate that his hair is a little longer, a little bit more out of control. But it's, again, not a lot of pin pressure, not going the same way. You don't want it to look almost rigid in what it's doing. I want to give it the indication that his hair's longer and therefore a little more messed up, right? Not as neat because it's longer and wilder. Works nicely on long-haired animals, especially long-haired animals that don't have nice, neat fur. And this monkey would classify as one of those. I'm going to do it even into the, see it as well, but it will be there, and then down underneath. And there we go. You can see it adds a nice effect to him. Alright, so now for the eye flare. The eye flare, even if I were to add color to his eyes, the eye flare is one of the most important parts. Usually it's just an oval that goes into the pupil. I'm going to see how an oval looks. Usually when I'm just doing it like this, I'm going to draw it in. Let's see how this does. So if I'm going to draw it, I'm going to take this lasso tool. And I'm going to create almost a curved teardrop, right? So I'm going to bring it in. Oops, not do that. I'm going to loop it and then have it loop down this way and then loop it back up. And then do the same thing on the other side. And you end up with kind of that loop there. Of course, because it's drawn, it's not as even, and I want one side to be a little smaller than the other. So let's trim a bit from that. And flush this one out just a little bit more. I might need to trim that back a little bit. Yeah, I was overzealous. Definitely shows up. I'm just deciding on if I think it's too big. The reason I made it so big is there isn't a discernible pupil, so if I still want the eyes to stand out, I want a nice bright highlight. Yeah, I think the left one is looking good. Go ahead, trim this just a little and move it. And so what I'm doing there, I'm just making sure it's so the eye is rounded. It's why I do kind of that rounded teardrop shape. It would be picking up the light in a sort of a rounded way against a rounded object. Yeah, I think that does work. Alright, so that is how you draw a golden snub-nosed monkey. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.